Well, welcome to Tea and Buns. It is fantastic to have you all here today. If it's your first time, can you just put a 1 in the chat so I can see who's here for the very first time? Oh, great. Oh, excellent. There's a few new people. Well, Tea and Buns is a community of people that meet monthly. You don't have to come every month. It's totally voluntary and open and free to come along. We started it a couple of years ago because we just wanted a chance to connect with the sector, talk about really important issues that leaders and the sector and organisations are facing. So every month we kind of pick a topic and we talk to each other and maybe some experts or people who have some experience with the topic we're discussing. And we just try to make the world a better place through our discussions and our connections and collaboration. So that's why it's so lovely to get yourselves to introduce yourselves so that you know who's who and make some new friendships and collaborations possibly within the group. And let's have just a really open and frank conversation today. And we're talking about one of my biggest exciting topics, and we'll explain that to you in a second, but this really is going to be just a lovely hour of really talking about some of the issues that we may all be facing and how we can actually take some action and try and improve our own performance, but also obviously the performance of our organisations. I'd like to begin with just acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all here today, wherever we are, and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of learning, teaching and research. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And I'm excited about today because I'm talking with Jill Lovell. Jill is similar to me in the fact that we're practitioners first and foremost. We're kind of coming into the academic space because we love research as well, but we're pracademics, okay, which is the fact that we love the theory, we love the academia, evidence-based behind our work. But first and foremost, we both have over 20 years of experience working in the nonprofit sector and leading organisations. And Jill has particular expertise in working in overseas organisations and development organisations in Africa. She's been living in Mozambique for many years, so has a really big interest in cross-cultural evaluations and also working in organisations that work cross-culturally. So I'm very privileged to have Jill along today, who's doing research in this area that we're talking about today. So I knew that we'd have a good conversation, and thank you, Jill, for joining us.
Ruth.
Yay. Well, we thought we would just kick off today with a really basic question, because I'm sure that you're all here for a reason and that you want to be part of this conversation. But what is it that your organisation or you personally believe are the benefits? You know, why do we conduct monitoring and evaluation in your organisation? Do you want to pop some things in the chat for me so I can see what you're already signed up for, what you already know is a really good reason for doing monitoring and evaluation? So Laura says, understanding impact and telling the story of change. Yeah, fantastic. Improving efficiency. Yes, we can improve things through monitoring and evaluation. To know if we're making a difference. Yes, absolutely. It gives us evidence. To understand what works so we can do more of it. Absolutely, Tanita, that's a very strength-based perspective. Steph says reporting. Yes, we need to actually report what we're doing with our funds and our organisations. To hear what stakeholders think, Kylie, thank you. So really getting people's voice and especially our beneficiaries' voice heard through monitoring and evaluation. Tracy, so you can evidence the good work you inherently know you're doing, but translate it to metrics that are understood. Yeah, so it's a bit of a translation exercise, isn't it, and a communication exercise. And Rachel says to identify benchmarks and see if we can create new possibilities to change the status quo. Absolutely. So it's not just about reporting what you're already doing. It's about seeing if you can actually change and improve and become more effective and efficient, and looking at the ways that you can do that. So I agree with all of what you've put in the chat, and All of those are really valid reasons for doing monitoring and evaluation. So when Jill and I were talking the other day, because we're actually running a workshop on this next week, we were saying, well, if everybody understands the importance and all the many benefits and reasons why we should be doing monitoring and evaluation, why are we not that good at it in many organizations? Why do we not do it enough? Why do we not do it well enough? You know, what are the barriers? What are the fears that hinders people from really putting the right resources, capabilities, you know, what is it that's holding us back as a sector? I'm really talking, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular. I'm just saying, why is it as a sector we find this so difficult? Because, I mean, do you agree? It is difficult. It's challenging. It's complex. Yet we know there are so many good reasons to do it. So that's what I want to know now and what we're going to discuss, because Jill and I thought that we would share 5 ways that we believe you can really improve monitoring and evaluation in your organisation as of today. If you get these attributes and start using this straight away. So for the next few minutes, we're going to present to you what we believe the literature is saying. So this is all theory based, but it's really practical for you, because you can take this away and actually say, we could do this starting today. And then we're going to end with a bit of a framework for you, a really simple one that we're using all the time with organisations that we believe is one of the most simplest frameworks. And we're going to give that to you at the end as well. And we're also going to give you some resources, and I've got some links to give you. And when we post up the blog with this recording, I'm going to put all of those resources up there for you as well. So I really want today to be very valuable and helpful to you, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. So why is it right? Okay, people are still saying, so it's often missed in the initial defined outcomes for a project, so people don't collect data. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Melita. Okay, so let's start with what we believe. So we're going to go through this slide here with these 5 things, and we've called this slide Embracing the Practices of M&E, Monitoring and Evaluation. And we've really had a good look at, you know, a lot of the research, a lot of what people are saying, and we believe there are really, we could, and it's not only these 5, obviously, okay? We want to just say it's not just this, and this is not a bulletproof kind of, you know, this is it. If you get this right, you're perfect. But we really believe that these are 5 things that can take the fear out of monitoring and evaluation. And the first one, and we're just presenting benefits and barriers. So I'm going to do a bit of the benefits, and then Jill's going to counteract me with a bit of the barriers and why these are really fearful for organisations. So the first one is creativity. One of the things that I think is that many organisations feel that monitoring and evaluation is very technical. So it's all about data and spreadsheets, and, you know, you've got to have, you know, a wonderful way of collecting the data, and it's all because we've been very used to outputs, which is often those numbers and percentages, and, you know, it's all the things that, I don't know, you know, I don't get my head around that all very easily. I have to really work hard on numbers and things like that. And so I think that a lot of people find that they can't be really creative and really use creative ways of collecting information, and monitoring and evaluation is really just a form of collecting feedback and information, and data comes in all shapes and forms and sizes. And so I think that, you know, to get away the fear of, you know, the fact that it's too technical and it's too complex and it costs too much money and too much time, if we really just embrace creativity and did things in fun ways, and I did actually use in the last slide, you would have seen the finger painting. You know, sometimes it's just doing finger painting with people, or it's, you know, making, having visuals or just doing really fun activities that engages people in asking them about what they think about our services and, what their feedback is. We don't need to make it any more technical than it has to be. And also it makes it very culturally safe because, if you're working with people with a non-English speaking background, or if you're working with Indigenous clients, or if you have children or families or, anyone that you really feel that asking them a survey is not really culturally safe, then you can do it in many, many different ways. So, Jill, what do you think?
Yes, well, yeah, I agree. We need to be creative, but I want to look at these barriers as challenges that we need to overcome. And, I recognize that there are clear challenges when we're trying to do monitoring and evaluation. And one is that it can be quite technical. And I think in overcoming some of these barriers, we've got here that we don't have clear learning goals. And somebody pointed out that it's something that can be missed at the start of a design process is, what are we measuring and why? And Ruth already mentioned that often we're talking about outputs. And when we're looking at monitoring and evaluation, what we want to be measuring is outcomes. And, what is the impact that we're having? We're not just looking for the numbers. We're looking for what is the change we're seeing when we're doing these interventions as an organization. So I think this creativity, we need to be looking at how do we overcome just getting, spreadsheets filled in for a donor and thinking about how are we co-creating this change and making an impact with all stakeholders in the process. Kylie talked about allowing stakeholders to have a voice, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But seeing how we can have dialogue, how we can interact together and create not just measuring the change, but what is it we even want to measure at the start of the process or during the process, and coming up with, some clear goals. So having some shared knowledge and shared meaning of what is it we're talking about when we're talking about change. My research with some organizations, that's one of the first challenges is being clear as an organization and as clients. Are we even talking about a term like well-being meaning the same thing? So, overcoming this lack of clarity is one of the first things we need to do in the process of monitoring evaluation.
Yeah, so does anybody use some really creative ways to monitor and evaluate? I know Campbell Page has been using some video and has been using some journey mapping and other types of creative ways of doing monitoring and evaluation. So that's good. Do you feel that creativity is a thing that is either a barrier or just feel free to tell us what you think, and if this is something that could really, if you could become more creative, would that help your processes and reduce the fear?
I'm happy to share something we've done. Yeah. So we did a piece of work a number of years ago where we created, they were hypothetical personas of people who would typically use our program, but they were comprised of like bits and pieces of real people. And we did do some journey mapping to describe, okay, well, what would ideal outcomes look like for Bob or for Joe? And it was really powerful. And I was dubious, but so pleasantly surprised at how much the stakeholders bought into the process of drawing and they had big pieces of paper and mapping it out, and they got right into it. And I think I was more fearful that these managers and executives or what have you from organizations, it was a mix of people, that they wouldn't really get into that. But they did, and we got some real clarity in their own words around what it looked like for Joe, what it felt like for him when he accessed the service, and what he would see, what he would feel. So all of those sorts of things. So it did work really well.
That's absolutely brilliant, because I totally love all of that as well. And in fact, in a previous Team Buns, we've done a Team Buns on journey mapping. So go check out that if you haven't seen that. But Tanita, thank you so much for sharing that, because I really agree that people really engage well when it's creative. We fill out surveys all the time, and I'm not saying surveys don't have a place, and they definitely do, but I just think that when we think beyond that, we can become much more engaging with people and make the process less fearful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. All right, well, let's go on to our second one then, which is embracing empathy. And in fact, Anita, you mentioned there empathy mapping. And we really know that now monitoring and evaluation needs to include more empathy. We need to understand what people are experiencing when they come to our services, when they engage with our organisation, whether that's as an employee, as a volunteer, or as a beneficiary. And it's really important that we don't take just, one person's perspective as being the truth, okay? That really every voice in monitoring and evaluation is important. That means our staff, our volunteers, our stakeholders, our partners, our donors, everybody has an important something to contribute to the process. And we mustn't feel like we can't ask people questions if it's in a very appropriate, age-appropriate, culturally appropriate way. People love to give feedback, and we mustn't feel afraid for asking people questions and saying, we really genuinely want to know your feedback. What do you think? So when we do that, when we treat empathy as the key attribute of our monitoring and evaluation process, we really turn our organisational culture to become more inclusive, participatory and responsive to that feedback, because it's very hard to not listen when we've asked a question. And we really then should be embracing what people are telling us from whatever their perspective is. And empathy mapping can definitely help us with that. So Jill, can that overcome the fear, do you think, or what's stopping us from using empathy?
It would be wonderful if we had the time and the money and the resources to do that. And I think this does tie back to our first point of creativity, because we may not have a lot of time on our hands. And sometimes, doing a survey is, a quick way to get information, but we have to recognize who it is that we're doing all of these programs for, what is all of this about. And it's about helping our clients and our beneficiaries, and finding ways that we can have empathy with them in how we get information from them that's useful for our programs that are for them is really, really important. So how can we find, it really has to be about creativity, because we have to find creative ways to get those voices, to get all the voices. And we have to change our mindsets in a few things. Some of it doesn't cost any money. And going from this idea of thinking that we know what our beneficiaries need or what our clients need, and shifting our mindset to say, actually, the people who are going through these situations, the Bob and the Joe in this persona, like they know best what's really going on for them, and hearing from them, finding ways to sit with them. Someone's put in the chat about youth from homeless shelters not wanting to fill in surveys. Of course they don't. I don't even like to fill in surveys so much, unless there's a opportunity to win something at the end. But can we sit down and actually have a conversation with them and find out, can they do some drama or some artwork or something to give us feedback that we can then translate into those numbers and narratives that we might need for a report. That's one thing, but actually what is most important is actually having empathy with the people that we're trying to provide programs for. There's a couple of things that came out in my recent research around this. One thing we need to consider is who is doing the collection of the data. And that might be different to the person who's writing the report that's going to a donor. They don't have to be the same people, because you need quite different skills when you're collecting information from people. And you need to think about as well, how close are you to those clients, and who are the ones that are actually having the day-to-day interaction with clients that are in the best position to have that empathy with the people that we're helping. But shifting from this idea that we know, or that, past experience says this program is going to work best for these people, and we just have to run it that way, and shifting to a mindset that, our beneficiaries possibly have a lot more knowledge than we do about what they need is really important, and doesn't cost so much money and time. And that's often a limitation that we put on ourselves is, well, I don't have time. And the final thing I just want to say there is recognize that it does probably take more time to do some creative ways of getting feedback and input and stories, and try and think about that at the start of the process and include that in your design of your program, that this is a significant cost and part of the program. It's not just a tack on at the end, 5% for M&E or, a little bit of cost at the end of the program, but actually build it into the design of your program.
I so agree with that, Jill, because I think that in the past we've kind of gone, here's the program, here's the evaluation. Whereas what we're talking about here is the fact that you can embed monitoring and evaluation into your program. So it's part of the process. And so it becomes not a, oh gosh, we don't have enough money and time to do evaluation. It's just part of what you do. And you're collecting that information and data and feedback along the way. And yes, we do need to collect it and actually write it down, document it, and then put it into a way that that we can communicate that to people. But that's all part, again, of the process. It doesn't have to be this thing that we don't have time and money for. Malati, sorry, I hope I say that right, has just awesomely said that we suggest their clients do TikTok posts on their experiences. I love that. How creative and how very appropriate probably for your group to be able to do that. That's real empathy for understanding who your beneficiaries are and what engages them in monitoring and evaluation. That's awesome. All right, let's go on to our third one, which is reflection. I'd really love to know from all of you, how much do you think you use reflection? Just, it could be individual, group, or organisational reflection on what you do. How much is that embedded into your organisation? Because I tend again to talk to people about this and they say, well, yeah, we understand what reflection is, but we don't have time, or we, there's, what does that mean? And, they don't even have time sometimes to do personal reflection. And, I think that's quite sad in a way, because there's so much research and literature out there that tells us that reflection is such a process of growth and learning. And if we can learn to do it individually, then we should be able to do it as groups and teams, or as organisations. And so when we're able to embed reflection as a discipline into what we do, it helps our culture start to become much more, I've said humble here. So humble in, well, what is it that I'm learning? Or what could I learn from this? Or what did that tell me about what was going right, or what I could do better? So it really helps to embed this kind of attitude of self-criticalness, this way of saying, well, hang on, maybe I'm not the expert here. Maybe I could use more empathy. Maybe we could do it this way. Maybe we could do it somehow differently. So, yeah, I'm really interested. Is reflection something that we kind of understand, but we're fearful of it for some reason? Is it a barrier, Jill?
Yeah, there's some great stuff in the chat there, Ruth, that perhaps some people could share how they're doing it, because there's a few organisations.
Might get Rachel to share in a moment.
Yeah, that are doing this practice. And I think this comes back to, again, why are we doing our evaluation? And sometimes we're doing it because it's required. We have to get the information back to a donor, or we want to get the information out to our supporters on social media. And it's also something that we see that I think often we think about the evaluation side of things more than the monitoring, and we see, okay, I need to do something at the end of this program, and we get all the feedback and we find out, did we make that impact or not, rather than seeing it as something we do all along the way, and we take time to say, how are we going with this? And we're going to get to a few other points that are really tied into this, but having space and time to stop and say, is this working? If it is, great. And what can we learn from what is working? How can we do that better and more, and maybe put that into other programs that we're doing? If things aren't working, can we have a close enough relationship with our beneficiaries and clients, and with those that are supporting us, and with management, that we can say, hang on, guys, we actually need to make some changes here. We're not just going to keep going along and doing this program because it was, given to us or put on us, or forced on us by somebody else, but we need to see it as a process that's happening all along the way, and finding some time to be asking ourselves the hard questions, which, I think we're going to talk about in a minute, Ruth, about, that it's not just about saying, we're doing a good job, but actually, what if we're not? And how can we reflect on that? And how can we be real with ourselves and be humble, as you say, and really value being able to make a change somewhere in the middle of a program? I think, how can we overcome this attitude of we just got to keep going, delivering the program that we've been told to deliver? How can we actually be able to my research is a lot about power and that in this accountability relationships, but how can we find power in this to be able to make some change if we really need to? But the first step of that is saying, how are we going and what are we doing and what next?
Because people have really got to believe that you're going to listen to their feedback.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure we're all aware of that when you're asked to do surveys about your organisation or, customer surveys of where you've been, you want to feel that you're giving your feedback is being listened to. And so, because if it's not, then we give up. We don't bother to give that feedback. So there's the power imbalance. Rachel, do you mind just sharing, because I know that you've really embraced reflective practice in your team. Do you mind just sharing us why you did that and then sort of what has the impact been for you?
Yeah, certainly. So look, we're a fairly new team and we're quite dispersed. So everything that we do is essentially over teams. So I found it a really good way and a safe space to bring the team together and to let the team decide about what were the topics that we really needed to be reflecting on. So I sort of don't go in with a real set agenda. The agenda that we use is really a reflective practice technique that just prompts the question. So we let the conversation go. Sometimes it results in like a really deep dive. So at the moment we're doing some equine therapy. So it might be that we go into a bit of a deep dive about what's working within that program and what we could improve on and what the young mums are giving us feedback on. And other times it becomes quite a strategic, high, blue sky look at the project, and we think about where else we could take this or what we could have done differently. So I think it's really about creating that space where everyone can share their ideas and where we definitely walk away with actions. And that's probably one thing I didn't anticipate going into reflective practice, that we together would decide about, okay, who is going to try this and who's going to come back and tell us how it went. And so for us, it's a real team bonding experience.
Yeah. So it's really a great way to connect with people and listen to your team who are out there, frontline staff working out there in the community. And it makes them part of your monitoring and evaluation process, doesn't it? Because otherwise, we can get this kind of idea that it has to be an expert doing the monitoring and evaluation, or it has to be just the leaders of the organisation or the manager. And that's not the case at all. It's around really engaging your staff and volunteers to ensure that they feel part of the process. And I think that's what you've done so well, Rachel. So thanks for sharing that. Anybody else got some really great examples or how you're doing it or anything that you felt has been a real barrier in terms of reflection?
It's Tanita again.
Yeah.
It's not a great example, but just reflecting on Rachel's comment there, I have certainly tried to embed some regular reflective practice in my team in past teams. And my observation would be some people get it and love it and once they get it, need it, because that's the time, that protected time is when they're actually gonna, they can't wait for digging into those learnings. And some people never get it. And it's just, and that it's really painful for them and a waste of time. I'm going at either end of the spectrum. There's variations there, but it was just interesting to me to observe that it's easy for some people to get it and much, much harder for others to see the value in it and to embrace it and to almost relinquish control of something to actually participate in it was hard for some people.
Totally agree. And I've heard people say we've got better things to do. And that hurts me because, I obviously clearly see the value in it. But you can't force it on people. And as you said, Tanita, if people don't understand the value, they will resist that a lot. All right. That's fantastic. Welcome, Anne. Put yourself
Hello.
on.
How are you?
Did you want to add anything?
I will add something because I think Rachel is a wonderful example of doing it really well, and it allows our program to evolve constantly. But I have another example where I've seen a team using reflective practice where they're reflecting on if something's not working, and then they add something And quite often they make their service quite complicated instead of going, what do we need to fix? So they just add more jobs to themselves. So I think there's also there's good practice around it that ends up with great results.
Yeah, such an important warning, I suppose, there, Anne, is that if your culture is very more inclined to look at the weaknesses and the negativity about what's not working well, if you're not problem solving and you're not solution focused, yes, that can actually potentially even harm your team. So thanks for bringing that up, Anne. And maybe that's one of the fears why if people have not been part of a good process of reflective practice, maybe that's one of the barriers and they don't want to be part of that again. So incredibly important to make sure that you've got frameworks, like Rachel was saying, have a framework. Be careful of your mindset around why you're doing it and what the outcomes are, and make sure, do monitoring and evaluation on your actual reflective practice as well, so that it's always being valuable and beneficial. Fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the fourth one then, which is learning from failure. Oh my goodness, this is one that we find very, very hard. For a number of reasons. We don't like the word failure, and I'm using it here, but it could be learning about what's not going so well or what we could improve on. But the reality is that when we're really open to this feedback, reflection, saying about, well, what could we do better? We're actually much more open to saying, you know what, I thought that was going to work, or I thought more clients were going to turn up, or I thought that we were going to have better outcomes there. And it's okay to be able to say, well, actually that didn't go as planned, or it didn't go as well as planned, or we could have done that better. And what that then leads to is that it means that we're more open to innovation and risk in terms of trying things new. And again, as a sector, I think that we're very risk adverse, largely because a lot of our money comes from funders and donors that expect outcomes, they expect impact. We're expected to say we're amazing and we're brilliant and we never do anything wrong. There's a kind of level of that expectation that we are falling into the trap of when we're able to go, well, hang on a minute, it's not all about, tick boxing and saying we're 10 out of 10. And sometimes it's about saying, no, we didn't get that right, or we could do better, or we could innovate, we could do things differently. Jill?
Yeah.
I experienced that.
Absolutely. And last week I was in Mozambique visiting the organisation that I used to work with there. And I was chatting with a young guy who is the monitoring evaluation supervisor for the organisation in Mozambique. And he said to me, Jill, can we find a way to explain to everybody why I am doing my job and why I'm doing what I do and why I come and, find out stories and why I come and ask them what's going on. He said, because the organisation, I think, sees me as a spy who's come in to check, what are you doing right and what are you doing wrong? And I thought, yeah, that is a really common attitude, that we have, a person who's doing monitoring evaluation and they're seen as the, the baddie that's got to come in and see, what you might not be doing. Have you met those KPIs? And we need to change our mindset and have, we can talk about a fixed and a growth mindset, and having a growth mindset that it's okay to change and to grow and to do something differently, and, to see mistakes as learning experiences, we can talk about, but it is all learning. And it, even implementing a program and you've done it for, 5-10 years, and then you find, oh, this isn't really working anymore, doesn't mean that you did something wrong in the past or that it wasn't a good program. It just means that perhaps your clients have evolved, or the environment around us has evolved, and what we did before doesn't work. I think COVID's been a great, way for us to learn that, just because we did something before COVID doesn't mean it was wrong. It's just we've got totally different circumstances now. So we have to have that attitude of being able to see mistakes and challenges and things that don't work as opportunities to say, all right, well, that didn't work. What might work? And I've been involved with a project where the donor it was a government fund from another country, and they gave significant funds to see young people improve their income. And the theory of change that they use that was providing young people with skills, vocational and technical skills, they would get a job and, you know, improve their income and get out of poverty. But what was not taken into consideration was the totally dysfunctional labour market of the country. And that even if you gave young people brilliant skills, there were no jobs for them to get into. And like just having to recognize and say, okay, this didn't work. This was just a totally, like, our assumptions were totally wrong. What might have worked in another country didn't work in this country. And having that mindset to say, all right, let's take all of that learning and use it and not just bury it under the carpet and say, you know, oh, well, we're not going to do that one again, but, you know, use it to inform how we do deliver programs and design programs. And
absolutely, yeah. And I think you're right there. We tend to just sort of bury things that don't work, or when our theory of change is incorrect. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to. And in fact, I was working with an organisation, actually quite a large one, and they said, at the end of every project, they do lots of little projects, and they said at the end of every project, we do this debrief and we document, you know, what went well, what didn't go so well. And I said, that's amazing. So how do you use that then for your next project? And they went, no, that just gets filed. And I was like, oh, well, it's, you know, you have to be able to use the learning. Otherwise, people are going to, again, go, well, that's just a tick box exercise, you know. And even if you're able to admit that something didn't go well, if it's not being valuable in the process, then it's not helping anyone.
Yeah,
Lisa, great.
Lisa asked a good question in the chat about how might we change the language around M&E. Yeah, so it isn't just about, you know, this spy coming in and checking.
Yeah. And maybe using the word failure more often. I mean, maybe actually talking and getting those taboos out there, like figuring out in your culture, what is the taboos in your organisation? What are the fears? Why are they not doing more and better, more effective in monitoring and evaluation? And then start to really turn it on its head. The reason I say that, and Lisa will know this, because one of our amazing social enterprises in Australia is called Taboo. And I was listening to Taboo Talk, the girls that run the Taboo, Isabella, and she was saying the reason we called our social enterprise Taboo is because we actually wanted to say, hey, this is a taboo subject. And that was the first time I'd actually really thought about the fact they'd called their organisation Taboo. And I just love that. And I thought, yeah, maybe we need to call it out a bit more and really change the way that we're talking about things by actually acknowledging that things, you know, that the language around how we're using things and the action, of course, because if we're not learning from failure, we're not doing reflection very well, and we're probably not embracing empathy. We're not doing probably all of that very well if we're not willing to be and acknowledge when things don't go to plan.
Yeah, and perhaps thinking about how we share that, you know, across other teams as well, because there's nothing worse than, you know, particularly for larger organizations, your team does a program, young people don't show up because they're not interested. You need to share that learning with other people and say, hey, we found this didn't work. And so you don't have to go through the same experience again. And
Yeah. I just also want to tell you that my daughter's 15, and just in the school holidays just past, I sent her on a workshop, and it was a fantastic workshop for young people, and she loved it. She got a lot out of it. And they literally just sent her a survey a few days later after the workshop. And I said, Abby, you know, come on, do the survey. They want your feedback. She's 15 and she's got other things to do in her life. And she said, yeah, Mum, I don't really want to do that. And I thought, what a shame, because she has some really good feedback to give them about what went really well and other things that they might want to change. And I think that had they picked up the phone and just said, hey, Abby, a couple of days after the workshop, what are you thinking now? You know, can you give us some feedback? It could have taken less than a 10-minute phone call with her to gain her feedback, and she would have really given them some great information. But she won't fill that survey in, and I can't make her, and they'll have to learn. If no one fills out the survey, they're not getting any feedback. So that's a real recent one for me. All right, time is cracking on, so we need to get to the fifth one. Thanks for all your comments. This is fantastic. Yeah, phone chats create that open dialogue. Absolutely, Steph. Yeah, and I just thought, oh gosh, just pick up the phone. She'll happily talk to you. Anyways, let's see what the fifth
says. If you can get a 15-year-old to answer the phone.
Yeah, that's right. SMS, absolutely, Lisa. She'd very happily do a text to them. All right, anybody guess what the last one is that we're going to share with you that we really feel should be part of your attributes here? I'm going to share it with you. It is, drum roll, aim to improve, not just prove. And some of you quite rightly at the beginning of the session said we do, and we know the benefits of monitoring and evaluation is to prove what we're doing. But unfortunately, that can also become something that we're so focused on that we don't actually realise that monitoring and evaluation is about improving. But I've put here something even more specific that I wanted to sort of, discuss with you all, that it's leadership in your organisation that needs to understand this and champion this. Because I think that sometimes as service providers or frontline staff, we know often some of the ways that, our own experience, we go, if we could only do this, or if we could do this. But it's not until the leadership of the organisation actually prioritise and understands that monitoring and evaluation is about looking for ways to improve what we're doing. Sometimes it's a barrier. And it's really, again, about coming back to this culture and this narrative about what is monitoring and evaluation all about. If we don't understand that it's about improvement as well as proving, there's nothing wrong, and we need to prove what we're doing, and we need those outputs. We need, the traditional sort of evaluation, but we need to make sure that it's not just about compliance, tick boxing, giving ourselves a nice pat on the back and saying, well done to me again. It really needs to be a process that says we want to improve what we're doing. Jill, what do you think?
I think, and Kylie's put something in the chat here that is related to all of these points. I think it's around finding what feedback you're already getting from stakeholders, particularly beneficiaries, and perhaps not coming up with another thing, which I think Anne mentioned, just tacking more and more things on, but, looking for ways that you're already getting information that would help you improve. So perhaps, you run an event and the young people don't show up. That is good evaluation and feedback, saying, people didn't come. So how can you use that? You already got that information, or stuff on the day that perhaps they could have found out from Abby, at that film workshop, that without actually having to get her to fill in a form, and what information do they already have from the way things happen. So I think that's a really great point, Kylie, that how are you already getting information that you can use? And then, yes, we don't want to just be proving at the end and having a final evaluation report of the program and saying, yes, we did this, or no, we didn't, we hit those KPIs or we didn't. But how are we actually improving what we do and the way we do things, and how are we, growing and learning and improving ourselves and the whole sector, and being a part of seeing, lives changed, and understanding that we can have power to change the way we do things as well, I think is really important. And building closer relationships, that's something that I've really seen in this research I've been doing, is that the closeness of our relationship amongst our own team, the organizations with clients, and the organizations with those that are supporting them. If you have a close relationship, I think there's a lot more forgiveness and a lot more room for dialogue, which is really, really key here. If you can talk about things with clients and with donors and with your team, the more you can talk about it, the closer you are, the more you have space to say, actually, let's make a change here, or let's do something differently, or, how can we improve what we're doing? This is actually going really well, but, is there another way we can improve this, and how can we share what we're doing with others so they can grow as well? We're not, little islands and competitors in this sector. We actually want to work together in this sector and grow together. So how can we share our learnings, not just in our own organization, but with others, and see improvement across the whole sector?
Yeah. Anne has made a good comment again and challenged us to think about making sure that we don't over consult or trigger people through our monitoring and evaluation, and that's another really great point. And I always revert to what we know as trauma-informed practices. So when we are working with beneficiaries, and Jill, you would know this from your work with refugees, that when you are working with groups that, yes, have been through homelessness or trauma in any shape or form, we need to make sure that we are working in trauma-informed ways, and your practices around monitoring and evaluation need to be trauma-informed. I wanted to just share a story there, actually, and it's a story I heard from someone who was having a conversation with me about this and said, yes, you know, you actually have to use this right from the beginning, because he was telling me about a story about where they went into it was actually going into the Congo, I think it was, and where there had been significant crisis and war, and it was a few years ago after, you know, some really bad times in the Congo. And he said, we went in there with the expectations that our organisation was going to build a hospital or a school or they were going to do some significant, lovely project for this community. And he said, but what we did was we used a co-design process. So we sat down with them and we said, okay, we know that you've been through significant trauma, but we're here to help. And, how can we help? And fully expecting them to say, can you build a hospital or can you build a school or whatever? And he said, after conversations with them and just listening to them, he said, do you know what it came down to? Do you know what we did? He said, we built roads. We built roads because what they told us was that they couldn't get around. So what was the point of building a hospital or a school if they couldn't get a market, if they couldn't get to those places? And he said, it blew my mind, because he said it blew all of our assumptions out of the way. And when we went in, though, with that sense of empathy, co-design, and really listening to their experiences, we were really able to tap into what they really needed and come from a real, different perspective. So I remember that story because I just think, yes, okay, that's such a reminder for us to make sure that we are being really respectful of people's experiences and what they're going through. Any stories, Jill, on that before we go to our last slide, which is really then how everybody can go away and do all of this today?
I just want to, affirm what Anne said there about, over questioning beneficiaries. I'm doing some stuff with some refugees in, a community, and it's a fairly small town. So there's a lot of organizations serving the same people, the same clients, and these clients are getting services from a variety of organizations, and sometimes they're not even sure, the names of the organizations. They just know I go to that particular office for that service. And if every organization is asking those refugees the same questions, you're probably not getting great data, and you are over questioning the same people. So perhaps we need to be thinking together as organizations, not just about how we dialogue with our beneficiaries, but how do we dialogue together and make sure that we're making these experiences as positive as possible and least triggering for the clients that do all have trauma in their lives.
Goes back to that creativity again, doesn't it? And so we thought that we would sort of show you one framework that you probably know this, but we really believe in this as a positive and a very, it's well evidenced framework, but it's so easy to take all of this and embed it within your organisation. And that is called Appreciative Inquiry. And you may have heard this cycle, but there's lots of information out there. In fact, I'll put some links and we've got some resources for you to learn more about this. But very, very simply then it's about saying, well, what do we want to know? And it could be quite open or it could be something specific. What do we want to know about this program or this group or this, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go into a discovery phase, which is really what's working well. So it's very strength-based, which is why I love it. And it's really about, well, what is going well? What did we do right? What are the ways that we're engaging with people? What are the outcomes that are being being achieved. So it's a very much strength-based perspective there. And then you go to the dream, which is about, well, what could we do better? What is that? So it's that listening to really empathizing with people about how we can improve, innovate, do something that would improve what we're doing to engage people. Or even if this could be a monitoring and evaluation process, you could be really saying, well, how could we engage more people in monitoring and evaluation, etc. And then your design is how you take that to the planning stage. So as Rachel said, if you're always thinking about what's going well, what could we improve, then you always should end up with some action that says, okay, well, what could we start with? Don't overwhelm people. Don't have a list of 25 things, like Anne says. You can't really overwhelm people around change. Sometimes it's about just picking one or two things that you're going to try and evaluate. And then your destiny deploy section is really about then, well, how do we continue to embed that? So if it is a change, how do we make sure that we continue that? Or do we need to evaluate that? Have we changed something that we need to actually make sure that's working? So that's why it's a cycle, because it's kind of never really stopping, but it's a real framework that you can use all of those 5 attributes, creativity and empathy and reflection, in this process. And it gives people a real sound understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing, because many people have lots of myths and preconceptions about what monitoring and evaluation is. Does anybody use Appreciative Inquiry? Jill, got any great stories?
You did. Anne, did you put your hand up there and say yes?
Again, I think Anne is doing some, yes. All right, well, maybe all of you, if you're not using it, please go check it out, but I'll put some links in for you and on the blog as well. Anne, your thoughts on Appreciative Inquiry?
I love it. I think it hands the message stick over to the person who the service is all about.
Yeah.
It actually, it stops you having to be the expert, because then you're just imposing things that you may not even realise are your perceptions and so on. Mm. So it's a framework that allows the person to discover what's important to them.
Yeah, great.
Work out what their dream is and so on. But it gets us out of the decision-making role.
Yeah. So what you've just said there is you can do this on an individual level, and you're certainly doing it with your beneficiaries as a process. But you can do it on a team level, and you can obviously do it on an organisational level. And in fact, I'm just about to release a new report. We'll send it to you all, which is a review on systems change. So that's taking it to another level and really thinking, and I've talked a lot about appreciative inquiry and how appreciative inquiry is a way of creating systems change. And so there's lots of research and projects that have been done using appreciative inquiry to try and change whole systems and engaging beneficiaries in that process to understand why the system is not working. So I'm literally, it will be today or tomorrow that I'm hoping to release that report. So I'll send you all a copy with some more links that you can sort of find out more about this. Great. Well, has everybody enjoyed that conversation today? Has that given you some thoughts? I'd love to hear just your takeaways from today. Are you sort of thinking about the fears that your organisation has about monitoring and evaluation, and are some things that we've talked about today sort of giving you some information to take away and think about and maybe reflect on about how you can embed more of that into your organisation? Yes, Sam, I will send you the report very shortly. I'm so excited about sharing it with people because I think that systems change is what we also need to be doing as organisations, not just, playing down here. Obviously, that's important, but we really need to think about how we're changing whole systems. So I've such enjoyed putting this report together, and it's actually got some appreciative inquiry questions in the report. I actually decided to do that. So I've put this whole list of questions to help your team reflect on the report that you're going to read. And I hoped that was a cool, creative idea for you all. So I'll get your feedback maybe after you read it. Great. Thinking about new creative ways of engaging our stakeholders. Fantastic, Laura. Great, Susan. Ruth says, the takeaway for me is to use the evaluation we have available as part of my practice. Fantastic. Yeah, it's confidence building to do more M&E. Absolutely, Rachel. Great. All right. Well, thanks for coming along today, everybody. Taking that little time and space out of your day, out of your week to come and chat with colleagues and and other people in the sector. I really love this time of Tea and Buns, and really grateful for you engaging and coming along. But I also want feedback. And if you think that we could improve Tea and Buns, I want you to send me an email. If you think of any other topics or speakers, I want to be led by you. I want you to tell me what's most interesting to you or challenging to you, so that we can have more conversations like this that are really going to encourage you, inspire you, motivate you, support you, whatever it is that you need to make the world a better place. Okay, so thanks so much for coming. I'll put this recording up shortly and maybe early next week, so that you can share it with your colleagues if you want to. And we look forward to seeing you at the next 10 Buns. Keep your eyes out for the email coming soon.